take care of you.
And we're live. So welcome to your Onion Podcast Show. And we have my co-host, Mr. Blobby.
Did you call me Mr. Blobby?
Mr. Blobby.
First of all, I'm a girl.
If you're watching the video, you understand because she's got this polka dot shirt. I can't remember what I called you last time when I saw you in that shirt.
You called me a mushroom.
Oh, that's it, a mushroom. But someone called you in the lift Mr. Blobby, didn't they?
But not Mr. I'm a girl.
All right, Mrs. Blobby.
My name is Anne.
Hello, Anne. So, yes, to our guest.
Hi.
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 Dr.
Felix Blaine. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. And thank you for having me here.
Hey, it's a pleasure. With all our guests, we'd like you to give us a elevator pitch. So just imagine that we're meeting you for the first time in an elevator.
Our elevator?
Our elevator. So you've got 16 floors.
Okay.
To literally give us an introduction to who you are.
Right.
And what you do. And anything else within that 15 seconds.
And I will take the time. And when we are up, we are up.
So. Yeah, by the way, when you said, oh yeah, I can do it without the phone. And then we watched the video afterwards. It came to about 20 seconds.
Yeah,
so
but
you're
I have a
1,000, 2,000, just doesn't work. All right?
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Oh, no.
I am ready. Soon. Okay, now.
16 floors. So I'm a British family doctor. I've been a doctor for about 23 years. I was about 20 years a family doctor in the UK with a variety of different specialties. And then for the last 3.5 years, I've been in Qatar working for Norfar, which is a specialist addiction hospital in Qatar.
We're up. Super good.
Nice.
Thank you.
So I'm curious, when you first came over here,
yes,
was it for the actual job?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. And what were they advertising? How did the advert go? Do you remember?
I saw an advert in the British Medical Journal for a specialist GP with an interest in chronic pain working in an addiction hospital. And one of the areas I'm really interested in is that interplay between medicine and psychology. So lots of areas of medicine don't really fit into this medical model where you see a doctor and they either do an operation or you take a tablet and it all gets better. But probably at least half of people actually move into an area where they have chronic pain or insomnia or addiction or all sorts of different things where actually it's a combination of what goes on in your mind and what goes into your body and how we feel about it and relate to it that actually is the main area. And this is the area I became increasingly interested in. All the patients that just couldn't, it's really lovely as a doctor when people come in and you find out what's wrong and you give them some tablet or some cream and they get better. But what happens to the people that still have symptoms and still don't feel better, and then it really starts dominating their life? So this was the bit of medicine I got really interested in, and that's what the job advert was. When I came over, though, they were setting up the hospital and they were asking me to lead the rehabilitation unit. And rehabilitation in medicine is really interesting. How do you help someone sort of recover their life from an illness? And you have that after maybe a stroke or after a nasty accident, but also very much an addiction. How do you learn to rebuild your life? And there were lots of areas that I had experienced and in other areas I had to learn very rapidly. But it's become a real interest of mine is how do you help people recover their life when they've hit rock bottom? And so that's really the area that's fitted into the other areas of medicine I was really interested in.
Do you think medicine is moving that way from, just giving a patient a pill to more of the holistic, the overall well-being of a person and how they live their lives?
I think massively, although like everything, there's always progress. There's some people who are visionary in leading, other people who are very much sticking to the model. And both models are really important. If I have a nasty car accident, I'm thankful to the surgeons who do all of the very medical stuff who save my life. So none of that's a criticism of medicine. But say you come after a nasty injury and you've got flashbacks and you can't really, and you're depressed and you're anxious and your life's fallen apart. How do you then understand all of that about yourself to rebuild your life? So you definitely need the surgeons, the anaesthetists, the people who do all of the medicine that's traditionally, that's all really important. And my family's had the same amount of medical needs as everyone else. You have operations and this and that, where you're delighted for that very medical approach. But there's an area where people get a bit stuck, and it's an evolving specialty, particularly in America. They're really leading the way. Britain, a bit less so, and other areas, I think it's really only just starting. The other area, I guess, is there's always the difficulty, and it's difficulty as a patient as well, when holistic encompasses lots. There's a huge amount of science behind well-being, the psychology, some of the movement sciences of how you regain your body and your mind. But there's also a lot of other bits which have less science, and the question is, how do you fit them all together? And it's not to criticise any areas, but the area I'm really interested in is maybe the science behind well-being and the science behind rehabilitation.
And the brain.
And the brain.
And the brain.
Aren't we understanding more about the brain with the latest technology, the MRI scans and stuff like that, that we are understanding more about how it works?
And I think, yes, definitely, because there's a tendency in science to always dismiss what we know and say, oh, there's so much more we need to discover. But the science behind the brain science, the special MRI scanners and all of the other techniques that have allowed us to peer into what was a complete mystery probably 40, 50 years ago. We really had very little understanding. That science is probably 30, 40 years old now, so we actually know a lot. And the area that I think for me is really fascinating is how do you start to teach people about their own brain, what goes on? That means that they can, so before, if it's a mystery, you almost can criticize yourself. A lot of human behavior is criticizing yourself. I've failed. I can't do this. I'm going a bit crazy. I keep making all these wrong decisions. How can you start to understand what goes on in your brain so that you can start to say, okay, so this is just another area of my body. If I understand it, I can start to make different choices. I can start to use different techniques. I can relate to it differently, maybe more compassionately. And so I think that's for me one of the real interests is, I'm not a neurologist or a neuroscientist, but that knowledge of what goes on in the brain, how can I relate to that to patients so that they can start to change their lives and get a better understanding for themselves and actually maybe a more compassionate understanding. We are so easy to criticize ourselves, and what's lovely to see is when people start to understand what's going on, they start to feel less bad about themselves because they understand this is my brain. I didn't understand what was going on before. I do now, and I can learn to improve.
Because it becomes, like a loop of bad things when you're being hard on yourself and you keep on doing what you did and you never come out of it, right? So it's like when you, just a silly thing, but if you're having problems with eating a lot of sweets and you find yourself always in the sweet shop and you can't understand why. Why do I keep on doing these things? It's like a broken record that is coming out into the same track, So it's like we need to change the tracks in our brain.
And it's definitely one of the areas I'm really interested in is mindfulness and how mindfulness is increasingly used in the science of medicine and psychology to help people with this. And one of the evolving areas of science is self-compassion. So for ages, it was felt that maybe the way we should change is to be really hard on ourselves. We need a big stick and we need to beat ourselves often. And if we make mistakes, we beat ourselves harder. Because, there's some logic behind that. If I'm really hard on myself, maybe I will make myself change. The science, however, suggests a complete opposite. That, in fact, by learning to be compassionate to ourselves, by realising that life is tough, we don't always do the right thing, and that's common, this idea of common humanity, that life isn't just tough for me, but everyone has similar struggles. We're more likely to try something new, to say, because often it turns out we don't try something new because what happens if I fail? I'm just mess up yet again. So maybe I'm safer just not trying. Learning to be compassionate yourself actually gives you yourself the strength to then make that change. And there's an amazing number of different related areas of psychology and science and all of this. And self-compassion is one of the really lovely ones, that by learning to look after myself, a bit like you would look after a friend or a relative, you would be actually often a lot less critical. We wouldn't say the things that we say to ourselves in our own head. And there's a whole science behind this of self-compassion that helps us learn how to change. And it's one of the things we teach in addiction is, you've had so much criticism, and actually 80% of that criticism's come from within your own head. And actually that becomes a barrier to change. So if you can learn to be a bit more sympathetic to yourself, to understand how you're feeling, that then allows you to start that process of change.
Nice. So can you give us an insight about addiction? Because I always thought it was just, you've got weakness and, if it's with sweets, for instance, or if it's for, certain food or whatever. You know, it's just a weakness on someone's part, but it's more than that.
Yeah, and it is really a fascinating area of research. So the definition is it's a chronic brain disease. And the reason they say this is the more they've looked at the brain and looked at the brain structures that happen in addiction, they start to realise, in fact, this is a process going on in the brain that causes addiction. Our brain is designed to help us seek reward, and the reward thousands of years ago was things like finding food, finding shelter, finding other people that we could share our lives with who would help protect us in a hostile world. So our brain's got this special reward system, and in many ways it's a learning system. So one of the different difficulties with addiction is that it sounds so bad. Who wants to be addicted? To start realizing it's your brain learning process that's been hijacked. And when we say hijack, what happens is our brains were beautifully designed, but unfortunately there's certain chemicals that directly act on that area of the brain. So alcohol, different drugs of addiction like heroin or amphetamines, they all directly act on that area of the brain. So does nicotine and tobacco.
Chocolate?
To an extent, yes. So it does. So one of the analogies I do, so addiction's really hard to... No one wants to have a trouble with addiction. So often one of the ways we'll talk about it is, I talk about pizza because actually that's a lot less. That's not so stigmatizing. Everyone eats pizza. So I talk
Everyone
about everyone eats pizza.
Yeah.
So the idea that, because everyone also likes this idea that we're in control of our brain. I'm in control. No one else controls my brain. I completely control my brain. And we all forget the bits where we're not quite so good at controlling. So last night I was a bit tired and I was trying to lose some weight and I ate some chocolate. And this morning I tell myself, well, I was tired. Everyone's allowed to be tired and eat a bit too much that night. So I keep my idea that I'm in perfect control. And one of the things, for example, is it's the imagination that if you're going out with some friends and you're on a diet, I'm going to lose a few kilos, and then your friend said, oh, let's go and get a pizza. And as you're walking to that pizzeria, in your mind you're telling yourself, I'm going to have a salad. I'm going to eat a salad because I'm good, I'm on a diet. And then you sit there and somehow your mind changes to looking at that menu and thinking, oh, those pizzas look quite good. And what we don't realise, of course, is the smell of the pizzas, the look of the menu, the fact we've been in pizza restaurants before and had a really nice pizza, the fact that you can see other people eating pizza. And in pizza are lots of fat, salt, sugars, which our brain is biologically designed to want as one of our rewards, because when there wasn't much food, that was a key process for survival. If you turn down fat and salt and sugar when there wasn't much food around, you wouldn't survive. So our brain's designed to look for that. And so that's that reward pathway. And if you sit there and just reflect in on yourself and notice that internal struggle, the thoughts are, I'm on a diet, but it's a special occasion, I'm with my friends, it's only one night.
I want that pizza.
Internal conversation that we all have. Yeah.
That is the reward pathway. And then you see how strong it is, because how many times do you actually eat that salad? And how many times do you persuade yourself, tonight's a special night, so I'm going to have a big pizza.
That's you have the key there, but because you are, well, if it's talk about me, I am aware, I am a pizza friend, I'm a pizza lover, I love pizza, and I know that, and I go in. It's not.
So you don't even have that conversation.
No, I just don't.
I am not going to have that salad.
I just don't go to the pizza place, because it's my old playground, and I can't afford to be.
So you don't have that internal conversation.
No, because I'm an addict. I'm an addict to pizza, alcohol. So all those things. I love what we are talking about now because
you can relate.
I can totally relate because I have this disease. It's And luckily I haven't been having a drink for 7 years, 5 months and 3 days today. So yeah. So I can totally relate. So for me, in the beginning, going into the so-called pizza place wouldn't be an option. Because I couldn't do it. Because I didn't know how to react to the pizza. So... But I totally understand.
And how do you help those people?
So part of what you do, so for example, you're talking about, staying with pizza initially.
Yeah, let's stay with pizza.
Yeah, we stay with pizza.
Because it's so easy so part of it is it's recognizing what's going on in your mind, because part of it is like, I don't have a problem with pizza. I can go to a pizza restaurant anytime I want and maybe have a salad, even if we don't. And you see this when people are struggling with addiction, it's like, well, I can just have a drink and maybe it's caused some problems, but really I'm still in control. I'm choosing whether I do it or not, and it's fun, so I'm going to keep choosing it, even if the evidence suggests with my life there's lots of unfun bits, lots of things that are going drastically wrong. I can keep this voice going in the line that it's sort of okay, I'm in control, and if I wanted to stop, I could, but I just didn't last week, and maybe I won't today, but I could if I wanted to. It's a bit like our internal dialogue with the pizza, really. We don't like the idea that we don't fully control ourselves. And part about teaching people very early on, for example, is if you don't want to eat a pizza, don't go to a pizza restaurant, like you said. Early on in recovery, if you meet someone that you used to use with, or you go to a bar, the chance of you coming out of there not having using is almost zero. But that's hard. That starts to understand that in some areas of my life, I don't have control. And this maybe comes back to the brain, because if I don't have control, that feels really hard. If I start to understand that in certain areas of my brain, as soon as I see that bar, my mind has learned associations because it's the learning center that gets hijacked. And therefore, it's telling me to get that reward. It's actually that my brain is doing what it's designed to do. It's just not designed to have certain chemicals triggering that. And of course, with alcohol or substances, they're far more addictive than pizza. So we're asking people to do far harder things. I mean, 1,000 times harder than avoiding that pizza, which, to be fair, as someone who likes pizza, that's hard enough.
It's true.
So in some ways, the other thing is, when you're working with people with addiction, is to have real respect for what they're going through. Because if I'm told I'm going to, the rest of my life, never eat nice food again, but I'm going to be surrounded by food in ways I can't avoid, I can't imagine how hard that is. And yet that's sort of what we're asking people to do. And often addiction people talk about hitting rock bottom and things. It's that moment where they start realizing, I can't go on this way. I'm going to have to take some of the most difficult journey of my life. And it's not even a quick journey, because early on we'll tell you never go near a bar, never meet your friends. But the reality is in life, you will always bump into things that will trigger things. So how do you develop that strength to just never have pizza again?
Absolutely.
But for me, it was, so I learned early in my recovery days, that play the full film, play the full film, if you know what I mean, when you're getting the urge to have the pizza, the drink or whatever it is. And to play the tape all to the bitter end, because where will it take me? Where will that glass or whatever it is that have the addiction for will take me? So for me, it was, to the bitter end. And that is what I need to remind myself of when I see other people having fun, fun. And it's like, no, that will not take me to that fun place. That will take me to a bad place.
And you play that every time?
Well, maybe not so much now, after 7 years, 5 months and 3 days. Keep on telling that. No, so maybe not so much, but I need to keep it fresh, because the brain is a little tricky one, so it can trick me because the disease is strong. So I need to keep it fresh,
But do you feel that? Because I'm always amazed the amount of networking that you do, and generally the networking is always
with
at a bar,
alcohol.
and alcohol is generally given for free.
Yeah.
So
no, I don't.
How does the brain?
So for me, I think it is because I just keep it fresh every day, that I do remember where I came from.
Okay, that's good.
So when I don't, because it could be could be moments when I in a plane, for instance, and see the trolley with alcohol and things on, and it's like, oh yeah, can I have a dry martini? No, I can't take that one, because I'm not on, I'm not on guard. I'm not prepared. So when I go to the events, I'm prepared mentally, and I have this uniform of my sobriety, army is with me. It's like, yeah, we're gonna nail this day. We're gonna do it. So it's the tools that I've been given, of people like you.
I think you mentioned lots of things. These are really key things that we help people understand. This one day at a time, that today I'm not going to use, which from on the outside seems slightly odd. Well, surely that's every day, but sometimes really today is the day I've got to make that decision. Helping people understand their own discussion inside their head, to recognize at-risk situations and what I'm going to do. Have a community of people that support you. So because especially early on, it's a really long, hard journey. And it's almost impossible to do by yourself. So you have things like AA and Narcotics Anonymous, which is that group of people around you that are that person that you can phone on a bad day, the community that is all in recovery together to give you that strength to make that, what can be a really long, difficult journey. Although saying that, it's also the number of people who've made it successful. I mean, that's the other thing with addiction. And it's really important. So one of the things talking about was, for example, how you make up your mind. How do I make up my mind so I've got the full picture? And one of the things we do with people is help them sort of talk through it the way that they start to realise, because our mind will shut off. They go, well, I've only got this bit of a problem, but those bits, they're all fine. And when they start to realise that if I take that step, everything else falls down too. I don't have a choice of just a little bit.
No.
My choice is no longer that. My choice is either this life or that life. I don't get a in-between anymore, which is a hard thing to do, to realise you can't. The other thing you said, full picture, we help people, for example, start to look at the type of person they want, the values that are important to them. Because if you start to really reflect on who you are and who you want to be, that can sometimes give you that strength on those difficult days, because I know where I'm shooting for, if that makes sense. A bit like we have determination to take exams and work really hard for a year. We don't do that because we're going to feel good every day, but we do it because we're wanting to achieve something else. And it's a bit like that as well, to give people the hope that actually, although this is a difficult journey, there are benefits for going through it. It's a bit like when all of us have struggles in our life. None of us want the struggles. We don't choose to say, I want more struggles. But we also look back and say, the person I am is because of those struggles. So to start to realise that by going through this journey, by learning about myself, by learning about my relationship, my friends and my family, in a few years' time, I can look back and think the person I am today is because of that. And although there was hurt and heartache along the way, in some ways there's also growth. And that's that part of hope as well, that I can work with other people who are further down that journey to realise that it is worth the daily struggle, because the people with that wisdom and compassion who are helping me now were along that journey earlier, and I can see how they've grown through those difficulties. So it's not a hopeless area. In fact, there's a lot of hope and positivity, although there's also a lot of upset and disappointment and fractured families and all of the other things that go along with it.
So true. No, it's true. And also in the beginning to be open, if you can be open and talk to, if you can talk to your colleagues, talk to your family, and so everybody is aware, so you cannot have a open back door, so keep it open.
Yeah, but do people understand if you're at the beginning, if you said to them, I have an addiction?
Yeah, well, everybody kind of knew. I was the last one that didn't really know.
So is that generally the case? You're the person that has the addiction is the last one to kind of admit that they have an addiction, or because everyone around them has been affected by that addiction?
Yes, and all. I think there's two things there. One is, yes, I think that's generally true, because everyone else can see all of the problems, but in your own mind, to admit you've got a problem means you've lost control. Some of the things from AA are this loss of powerlessness. I no longer have control over my life. I have to ask for help from a higher power or others. It's that feeling that I'm not in control is a really difficult one. And even then, when you say I have an addiction, it turns out that along the way, you still build more barriers. Like when we're trying to understand ourselves, it's like peeling an onion, we get down to another layer. So other people can see all of the problems. For us, we can see problems, but we're also quite resistant to the idea that actually this is what's going on. And I come back to the brain, starting to try and destigmatize it, to talk about this is your learning mechanism that's been hijacked. This is what's going on. It's not a solution. It's not, a total solution, but it starts to help people realize this isn't something that is morally wrong, or, this might be my genetics. It might be partly my previous events. It might be I used at a young age, whatever it might be that's led me to this path. But at least I can start to see, actually, there is something going on, and there is a way to start finding a way out.
And it's a disease, addiction. So it's amazing that you guys are here and, help people, because we cannot help it. If we become sick, we wouldn't, if you were sick, like sick, I wouldn't be angry with you that you were sick.
That's true, but then people don't see addiction as...
No, exactly. And that is, I think we need to show that compassion to each other. depending, because we are sick. If that person is sick, we need to treat them with respect and also with firmness, to take action. I would say take action.
And I think if we talk about the idea that families often recognise earlier than the individual there's a problem, in some ways the more difficult thing for a family is to really understand that person is struggling with something that is almost beyond them, if that makes sense. Because we still, naturally, if someone does something wrong, we blame them. And that's not necessarily wrong, that's partly how society works. If you do something, there's results from that. But to understand that someone is sick, addiction is one of the hardest ways. If you break your leg in an accident and you're in hospital, no one, a car hits you or something, no one blames you. And the fact it's going to take 8 weeks to recover, again, that's just, I'm really sorry, and can I do anything for you? Addiction, is at the other end of the spectrum of that. It's one of the hardest areas for people to get their heads around, because we're trying to get our heads around multiple processes going on in the brain that are only still partially understood. And so to really understand that someone's suffering with something that we can't see, we can't pin. And reality is people are making decisions. So it's not like there are no decisions in addiction. People are still, they eventually, when you come down to it, people are choosing to take a different path and they learn the skills along the way. So there is some choice element in there, which is why addiction, I think, is the hardest thing for friends and family, to watch someone literally destroying their life and knowing how to help.
And why are people more addicted than others? What is the difference in their brain compared to other people?
So there's something happens in addiction to the brain once you get addicted, but there's risks before that. So we know, for example, different substances have different levels of genetic involvement, but on average, it's about half of it's genetic. So, for example, if you look at nicotine in tobacco, when you smoke a cigarette, the nicotine affects certain receptors in the brain, because our brain's full of wires, and then between all of the wires, rather than joined with another wire, there's a tiny little bit of chemical that's released, and that goes onto receptors. So the nicotine binds onto that and releases something called dopamine.
Can you show that on the brain where it
so
is?
Deep in the reward center is deep in one of the most basic areas of the brain, because it turns out all animal brains have this learning center. And this learning center uses this neurotransmitter called dopamine. So when you smoke a cigarette, the dopamine goes very quickly from your lungs into your blood, into your brain, and binds onto a receptor that releases abnormal large amounts of dopamine in the brain. Some people's receptors bind really strongly to the nicotine. So when they have a cigarette, masses of dopamine is released. And it turns out they are more easily addicted and they find it much harder to quit. Other people have their receptor just by chance doesn't really fit the nicotine, and therefore they don't release much dopamine, so they're less likely to get addicted and they find it much easier to quit. So you can start to see how different receptors in the brain that the chemical is binding to actually make a difference. The other thing, though, we know is, for example, is that if you have difficult events in childhood, and a whole range of different things, from traumatic events, parents with a substance abuse problem, parents going to prison, divorce, different sort of traumatic events in childhood at a young age, that makes it more likely to become addicted. And we also know that our brains are developing. So we all know our bodies are developing, but the big bit of the brain, the frontal lobe here, this is a bit of the brain that makes all of our decisions. And in actual fact, this is quite late to develop. In fact, it doesn't finish developing till your mid-20s. And a lot of what's happening in the teenage years is this area of the brain in particular is developing very quickly. The trouble is if you introduce substances while this is developing, it actually changes it. So, for example, if you start smoking cigarettes at age 13, 14, or 15, your chance of getting addicted compared to if you smoke your first cigarette in your early 20s is about 20 times. It's hugely more. You've got about a 30% chance of being addicted if you smoke at the age of 15 for the first time, and about 2% chance if you start smoking at the age of 21. One of the difficulties, of course, is that teenagers experiment. Part about the teenage brain is they want to find new things. And as a human race, that's really important. Young people often come up with new scientific ideas, all sorts of, we need, as a human race, we need that part of the brain that's looking for new things. The trouble is new things, when they come to substances that directly affect the learning center of our brain, are risky. And if you have it at a young age, you're much more likely to get addicted than if you try it in your mid-20s. So there's a whole variety of different reasons to say why you should be addicted, but one of the things I guess for me is really important is most of the risk factors, whether they're genetic, traumatic childhood events, trying at a young age, happen before we're adults. Although we blame people for addiction, most of their risk factors happened when they were still children. And that's one of the really difficult things with addiction, is that actually all of the risk factors happen early on, but often the results of people struggling with addiction are later on.
Wow. Yeah, I see.
Blown away.
I see why I am who I am. I shouldn't have done that when I was young. No, but really, and what you said also, the thing is that I am the person I am thanks to all the experience and things I've been through. So I'm happy to be alive, actually, because this is a deadly disease. This is a chronic deadly disease. So, yeah, I'm happy to be here.
So we're coming to the end of the show.
Yeah.
But I do want to touch on the actual hospital, Norfa.
Yes.
Because we had the privilege of having a tour around the facilities.
Amazing.
And they were amazing. And
like a 5-star hotel.
Absolutely.
It's amazing.
Do people generally want to stay?
It is an amazing site. It's quite inspirational, really, what Qatar's done, because they talk about brain disease and the fact it's not people's fault in Britain and America. And then when they set up the hospitals, they're normally the oldest hospital behind the other hospital with a small back door.
Absolutely.
And things. And what the Amiri decree that set up Norfa, really says actually addiction is recognised by all scientists as a disease, and therefore people should be treated with respect and should be allowed to recover with dignity. And then they haven't just said that, which they say in Britain and America, they've actually put the resources in to actually make something really amazing. Obviously, it's fairly new and it's still developing, but it is quite, it really starts giving people a real chance, for people and their families, that there is hope of recovery, and that it might be a long journey, but there's a lot of people and different specialties along the way to help them on that journey.
Yeah, it was incredible.
Amazing.
I was blown away.
Yeah, I was amazed for several days afterwards, actually. It was amazing, because I have been seeing, as you spoke about, those dark places in my country. That, I'm happy that there are recovery places, but it wasn't like you guys. It was nothing like that.
No, I think the vision behind Norfa is really, and what it's going to, like all these things, big projects take a while to deliver, but really what it's becoming and will become over the next few years, especially they've got, for example, they've got an fMRI machine there they're going to be doing research on addiction. The investment in that to really say this will be a centre, one of the world centres for addiction and its treatment and its research is quite, an amazing thing to do that many countries talk about, but lots of them don't quite actually put the investment and the long-term support that's needed to develop something like Norfa is becoming.
You must be so proud. You must be so great. It must be feeling good in your heart to be there.
It is, and you get special moments. So a couple of weeks ago, they had a celebration for 2 young people who had been on our unit for a few months a couple of years ago, and then they were celebrating 2 years sobriety and finishing. The program goes on, really looking at the brain takes a long time. And they'd been in treatment for 2 years, and they were looking at a new life, new career with their families and all of the things they want to plan to do. And I was invited to the part of their celebration for achieving 2 years. So it's moments like that when you see people at the moment where they come in and life really is tough. And then you see people 2 years later really looking at a new future still, but they'll be in treatment. They'll still come to Norfa maybe once a week, but really most of their life is now focused on the future. Is really, moments like that are really special to see.
Yeah, they must be really rewarding when you see that. Well, thank you, Dr. Felix.
Thank you,
really
Dr.
appreciate you coming in and taking the time and explaining everything about addiction and brain disease and the facilities. We do have a quick fire round.
Okay.
What's your favourite film?
Dead Poet Society.
Nice.
I like the idea.
Very
Carpet
good.
Seize the Day.
Captain, my captain.
Yes.
Favourite book?
It's probably going to be Harry Potter, which I've read to my kids for like 15 years, and it's become our family favourite.
Superb. The person that you look up to, that you've been influenced by?
I think there's a variety. It's people like Nelson Mandela or the Dalai Lama, or people who really have had tough lives, but throughout that they end up becoming inspiration to others. I'm not sure there's one, but there's so many people that, the world can be a cynical place, but not everyone's cynical. And there are genuinely some people who transcend that, often through difficult times. So it's people like that, I think, that are a real inspiration to me.
Nice. And do you have a quote?
Ooh, no, I don't. I should. There are too many. There are too many ones.
There are so many.
And
yes, I have a question. So, what makes your heart sing, and what makes you happy and feeling a lot of gratitude?
So, gratitude is actually something we teach because it's a really important practice. And there is a quote that it's not happiness that makes us grateful; it's gratitude that makes us happy. And I think there's a lot of science behind that. So there's obvious bits when I do my gratitude practice and I sit and remember to be grateful. First things are probably my family, but actually being a doctor and being able to work with people is one of those things. You look back on the previous day for those few moments where something really changed, or you're able to maybe be alongside someone on that journey. And there are often moments that my gratitude practice will take me back to.
Nice.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you so much.
You.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And we'll catch up with you next week. And don't forget the other podcasts that we produce, Do I Heat and In the Game. Take care.
And our food review.
And our food review.
Yes, it's a good one.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.